Are your landings always smooth? If you said yes, you're the greatest pilot that ever lived and can skip this video. But if you're like the other 99.9% of us, you might benefit from a few helpful tips here. We're on the extended final to runway 6 on Nantucket. We've set the wind at dead calm to cut down on variables, but the tips we're demonstrating will work in any conditions. First, I invite you to think of the landing approach the same way you think of taxiing on the ground. When you're taxiing, you could do a good job staying on the center line by imagining the yellow line sort of cutting your body in half. That is to say, by keeping it between your legs. If you notice the line getting off to one side or the other, you're going to correct by adding the appropriate rudder input. You learn very quickly in training that you taxi with your feet, not your hand, which controls the aileron and is useless in moving the nose wheel. Let's think of final approach the exact same way. Lined up on final like this, we can draw an extended center line with our mind's eye splitting our body right in half. Just like with taxiing, we're going to correct for any right or left drift by applying appropriate rudder. It's very tempting to use ailerons to correct for any side drift, but remember that for any aileron input, we're both increasing lift and drag on one side of the aircraft and decreasing it on the other, causing adverse yaw, which if not properly corrected with rudder, causes us to get even further off centerline. For these small corrections, consider using only rudder to correct, rather than continuously driving with the aileron and hoping we can match with correct rudder correction. Think of the rudder as a scalpel, able to make small corrections, while the ailerons are more like a blowtorch, better for larger corrections or actual turns to new headings. The rudder benefits from prop wash, giving it more airflow and making it more effective. It's further away from the center of gravity of the aircraft, so its turning ability is greater than the ailerons. And finally, unless you're really pushing the rudder to the floor, there's very little effect on the plane's bank from a rudder input. For the small bounces and jolts of final approach, the rudder is often best. Obviously, a large correction would require aileron and rudder input, just as you would for any turn. So we're going to work to gently and continuously tap those rudder pedals on final, just as if we're taxiing in the sky, keeping the extended center line between our legs. Now, this only looks right if we're in a calm wind scenario. When the crosswinds are heavy, we need to crab into the wind. The runway is off to our left here, but we're tracking towards it thanks to the drift. Obviously, it's tough to visualize this as taxiing in the sky. The center line doesn't come right between our legs here. So instead of that visual, let's visualize our chair, our very butts, moving along that extended center line and using the rudder to correct for right or left drift. If you can learn to visualize your approach as a coordination between an aiming spot and the seat of your pants, you can fly much more naturally. Let's carry that thought a bit further into judging both the lateral part of the approach and the vertical. One of the biggest challenges in the landing is figuring out if we're too high or low on final. Sure, the PAPI lights are a good way to tell, but we don't always have them, and it'd be great to develop a more natural feel for the approach. You've probably heard of picking out an aiming point on the runway. Most PAPI or VASI lighting, this one included, are designed to bring you to the 1,000-foot markings on the runway, centered here in our imaginary target. We should visualize the approach such that our butts are moving down to scrape the runway right on this point. Visually, that point will remain stationary in our view, while parts of the runway closer in will seem to move lower and parts further out will move up in our viewpoint. Finally, as we bring power idle and get ready for the landing, we should move our eyes down to the end of the runway. It engages our peripheral vision to judge height above ground. Notice that though we were aiming at the 1,000-foot markers, our rollout causes us to drift a bit beyond that to the touchdown point. This is normal and is part of the landing approach. Hopefully these few little tips will help you think about landing approaches a bit differently and give you a bit more confidence in your own pattern work. If you're excited about these tips and want more training content, check out all our ground schools from private all the way through commercial and more at the website linked here and in the description. See you there.